All right, vetters, I have an awesome video for y'all today. A bunch of y'all have been telling me to make a video about this, so here we go. I'm going to be presenting a new podcast that was just, well, I guess it wasn't just released. It was released quite a bit ago, back in December, but I'm just now hearing about it. And it features Hal Puthoff and someone else that we'll get to a little bit later, talking about UFOs. Right, in a way that I haven't heard really Hal Puthoff talk. The technology, right, the behind it, UFO technology, right. Honestly, this was such an amazing podcast. I'll put a link in the description to the full episode. And of course, make sure to stay to the end because I've got a special surprise from someone I hadn't heard from before, who apparently has been reverse engineering metamaterials that he claims are extraterrestrial. So make sure to stay to the end for that clip. I don't even know what to think about it, y'all. It's honestly mind-blowing. Now, before we get to this first clip, I do want to tell you guys about today's sponsor. All right, y'all, let's talk about the sponsor of today's video, Straight Arrow News. All right, you can use this link down below right here on the screen, san.com/vetted, VETTED. Sign up today. It's free to join. Okay, you can get the app if you have an iPhone, Android phone, you know, tablet, whatever, or just on your desktop. Really easy to use, just straightforward. It's free to use, and you basically just get unbiased, straightforward news, right? Not left-leaning, not right-leaning, just straightforward, okay? This is the news. Here's the facts. Make up your own mind. I absolutely love the site. It totally fits with what we're doing here at Vetted, and there couldn't be a better sponsor. Honestly, I hope they stay with us because I actually use this product, and I love telling y'all about something that I personally use myself, to be honest with you. Again, free to use, right? Just use the link below. There's one in the description or the top pinned comment of this YouTube video, or again, just use the website on the screen, san.com/vetted. Go sign up. Really easy. Look, let's just take a look at it, right? This is what you're getting. They got videos, they got articles, all independent journalists who are just providing the news, okay? No BS, no nothing else. I love it. Again, it's something I use. That's probably the best part about it. It's actually something I use, and you can get everything the way you want it, y'all. So I highly recommend checking out this site, san.com/vetted. Check it out today. Peace. Let's get to this first clip from Hal Puthoff talking about UFOs, again, in a way I just haven't heard before.
But one thing I can add is, which chimes right in with what he was talking about with curved space, is that as part of the UAP program for the Defense Intelligence Agency, you hear pilots saying, "Oh my God, what we're seeing just way beyond our physics." But it turns out that's not really a true statement. It's, as Larry said, it may be beyond our engineering, but it's not necessarily beyond our physics. And so I had the experience of making a list of all the weird things that had been claimed to have been observed on one side of a piece of paper. And then on the other side of the piece of paper, say, if I could engineer Einstein's equations of general relativity the way we engineer Maxwell's equations for electromagnetism, what kind of effects would I would see? And it turns out that across that piece of paper, you can get a one-to-one correspondence. So I think that actually our understanding of some of the far-out aspects of observations of UAP fall within a realm that we can understand. And so then that provides motivation for saying, okay, well then how can we find a way, engineering-wise, to move into that band? Well, we've got a long way to go, but at least we have a direction to go.
So that's interesting, right? And I've got another part to this clip, so stay with me here. But, right, typically you hear that, right, from Hal, what he said at the very beginning of that clip, essentially that, right, this isn't like new physics we don't understand, just more engineering we don't understand, right? So it's not like new physics, it's just engineering we're not capable of. And that's definitely a diversion from what is normally said, because that's what you hear all the time. Oh, I'm seeing new physics, all these things, right? I just found that interesting, right? Amongst other things that he said, right? Make sure to leave comments down below of what you think. Now, let's get to the second part of this clip, because it's equally as fascinating.
If you wouldn't, I mean, obviously, there's so much of this, and we've got so many people who have seen a wide number of really interesting observations that pertain to a whole expanse of things in terms of advanced, whether you want to call it advanced physics, anomalous phenomena. Some of that would fit in the UAP side of things with advanced craft or other energy phenomena. Other would be in different realms, right, of what's interesting. And I kind of think about, well, it's almost like if we were experiencing static electricity before electricity was harnessed, or if there was some phenomena that so many people were seeing pieces of it, but maybe not the whole thing. And there wasn't that fully understood and acknowledged explanation of this is just how it fits into our framework of the universe or physics or chemistry, whatever it is. When you talk about those weird things on the left-hand side that then sync up with engineering Einstein's equations, what are some of those weird things on the left-hand side that are discussable?
Well, for example, someone approaches a craft that's of a certain size, and then when they get inside, it's as big as a football field. Well, how does that happen? Well, it turns out that one of the predictions of your engineering Einstein's equations, you could have that happen. Another example would be when a person on the ground sees a craft come along and suddenly do a 90-degree turn at Mach 10, you say, how could anybody survive that if there were many beings inside? However, if you look at the engineering of general relativity, you find out that under certain conditions, time is running much faster in the ship that's being engineered than it's running outside. And so they just take a leisurely turn. Of course, when they look out at the people on the ground, they all seem to be in slow motion. So what looks like an unbelievable turn to us can be a rather leisurely turn from those who are inside. Other aspects, military people who've gotten too close to powered up craft will often get, or worse yet, radiation sickness. And so it turns out that when, again, you're looking at the equations of general relativity, under these conditions of having advanced propulsion, it turns out you get a blue shift in all the frequencies. And so ordinary black body radiation coming off the heat of the craft, which ordinarily would not be particularly harmful, if it gets blue shifted up into the UV and even beyond that into soft X-rays, well, then suddenly you can be harmed by that. So again, there's an example where we see an observation and we can link it back to the physics. And there are just a whole number of those.
Yeah, and those are really, are there any others that you think are, I mean, I think it's a good part of the reason that we're discussing this so much now is that not everybody has had all these observations that you've mentioned are public, right? These are all things that we've heard so many people who have been there, seen it firsthand, and there's books, there's podcasts, there's testimony to Congress, all these things. Those three examples you just gave are shareable, but at the same time, it's not something that's in Physics 101. It's not something that many people haven't actually been exposed to it. So considering that there are engineers, scientists, people who frame out, whether as investors or as funders, what should we be digging into? What are some of these other things on the left-hand side of the sheet of paper, the unusual things that you think scientists or investors should be taking note of, in addition to the one you've shared?
Well, in addition, for example, strength of materials. It turns out that the material bonds get blue shifted also. So that means that a craft like that with material bonds blue shifted could go into the water, go into land, and not come apart, because to those that are there, the rest of the world looks like butter. And so you're able to go right on through. So hardening of materials under these warped space-time conditions is another element that you could pursue. So really, all these fall in line in a very straightforward way. And by the way, it has been accepted in physics. I put together a whole list of all of that and what the consequences are in general relativity. And I published a paper in the Journal of the British Interplanetary Society. So this stuff is making it into the physics journals, if you know where to dig.
And I'm sure this is going to be a go-to read for anybody listening who cares about things like transmedium interactions or non-interactions with mass. So that ability of something to, I think what you're referring to on the observational science side is when we hear about these craft that are going from 80,000 feet to sea level in less than a second on some of these things, and I'm not sure what the speed is, when they're going into water, but they're not hitting it. There's not that impact one would expect based on speed. So that kind of transmedium transport. So what is that journal? What's the date on that? Journal of British... What is it?
The Journal of the British Interplanetary Society. Lily, if I could dig that up in a hurry.
We can always get back to you on that. You can get back to you after.
I'll have to dig it up. Yeah.
All right. So Hal Puthoff, man, holy smokes, right? There's a lot there to unpack, and that is absolutely a diamond in the rough there as far as podcasts go. Again, I'll put a link in the description. Please go check out the full podcast. It is almost 3 hours long, and just honestly, there's so much I could have included in today's video about it, but I highly recommend going and listening to that full podcast if you're interested in this. Now, let's get to this second part that I told you about at the very beginning that you'd want to stick around for, right? Because it's someone new in the field that I hadn't heard of before, to be honest with you, and maybe you haven't either. His name is Richard Banderick, and he is the CEO of Field Propulsion Technologies, Inc., focused on developing the next generation of propellant-less spacecraft propulsion systems. As you can see here from his website, right, Field Propulsion Technologies, Inc., they got that picture of this electric spacecraft, which is absolutely just mind-blowing. What is that thing? Holy cow. It looks straight out of a movie. And here's some of his contracts, right? This guy's clearly have been working on it. He's got some patents here that you can check out. Again, I'll put links in the description. Feel free to go check all that stuff out. He clearly is, part of this conversation. And what he has to say is, it's mind-blowing. But before we get to that, let me just kind of explain a little bit what field propulsion. It's talked about like this. Field propulsion is the concept of spacecraft propulsion where no propellant is necessary, but instead momentum of the spacecraft is changed by the interaction of the spacecraft with external force fields, such as gravitational and magnetic fields from stars and planets. Proposed drives that use field propulsion are often called a reactionless or propellantless drive. Now, that can also be taken as, in space, you'll see craft, you've seen it in movies, whatever, how we got to the moon. They'll typically go around a planet and then slingshot out, right, using the gravitational field as a way to push forward, right, and save gas, if you will, right? So that's part of it, but there's also much more to it, right? And what Richard is about to say here in this next clip is dealing with sort of metamaterials, right, that he has studied, that he is saying are extraterrestrial. Take a listen.
And then Richard Banderick from Field Propulsion Technologies. So Richard.
So I'm CEO of Field Propulsion Technologies. My background is electrical engineering and mathematics. And 40 years ago, I was involved in a company, the part owner that used to do reverse engineering.
And you shared the cloaking, which Hal's also spoken to cloaking research in another podcast, but are there others that you would share?
No, so I'm kind of limited. But, one thing I did notice was looking at some of these materials is they were smart materials. Like one of the things is when these materials, you'd be looking at them and you try to reverse engineer them, that they would turn to dust. And they would do it within a minute or two. And then so you could take the dust and then set it off and get the isotopic analysis done on them. And they were extraterrestrial. But these materials, we're looking at something that's hundreds of years ahead of us. When you look under a microscope or an electron microscope, you're looking at something that's composed of very small particles that seem to be communicating with one another. So those are the things that I've been involved in that I'm not that we can talk about, but I think that's one of the reasons why extraterrestrial materials are not really available to most people, is because most of them are set to disintegrate if they get in the wrong hand.
That's really interesting what you shared. So the smart materials that then turned to dust within a minute or two. I've heard from a number of people who have spoken to how material is terrestrial versus extraterrestrial. I've heard people share a variety of ways that you can tell that. But Richard, are you able to speak to how it was extraterrestrial versus terrestrial origin?
No, well, it's the isotopic analysis of the dust that's left behind tells you it's extraterrestrial, at least where it was manufactured. But so we're looking at materials that can reconfigure themselves. So they are composed of small subunits. So the type of things I looked at were something as small as a sliver of metal that would reconfigure itself depending on where it was. It would cloak itself and it would try to blend into the environment. So the ones that this one NGO used to get a hold of were the ones that were technically broken. I guess the ones that didn't really function very well. So then you could collect them every once in a while and then try to analyze them. You could do things like split them apart. They would attempt to find each other or reconfigure. Some of the experiments they did was we took one of those and we put it on a very hot surface of about 3,000 degrees. And what it would do is it cooled the surface around itself. And then when we took the device off and then waited again, we would find that the mass would be reduced by a certain amount. So these are really curious types of materials. So that's how we could kind of tell they were extraterrestrial, because these things weren't like decades ahead of us. They were probably hundreds of years ahead of us.
Yeah, we found that they were layered alloys at the micron levels. And none of our technologists, even in the big aerospace corporations, could make these layers bond together. So just by their physical construction, we could tell it was way beyond anything that had been manufactured in our ordinary technology here on Earth.
Yeah, that's what I saw too. You were looking at the outside of a craft or materials that came from a crashed spacecraft or something?
Yes.
Yeah, so we were looking at very little things. They seem to deposit all over the world. We were estimating there's probably trillions of these things that are deposited, and they have all sorts of functions, which really kind of implies that maybe this group is actually manipulating our species.
Mm.
But you can still acquire those. You know where to look for them. We know how to find them.
Well, if you find a hatful, why don't you send them our way and we'll take a look at them.
Yeah, that's it. So the group I used to work with, I don't talk with anymore because they got upset at me for talking. So, but I have an idea where someone could get them.
Sounds like we've got, Hal, it sounds like we've got some sources in the chat. So I think we got a number. I don't want to call out the person who's telling us sourcing, but I think we do have, I guess what you're saying, Richard, is they're ubiquitous, right? And so there's a variety of sources in terms of where to get these.
Yeah. We were assuming that they're everywhere, right? Even the ones that would work, we would never be able to find because they would cloak themselves or reconfigure themselves to be something, but not all of them are functional, right?
So look, I have to admit, this episode today was one of my favorite to make and actually research and look into, because it just involves technology and whatever, physics, and it's just fun. I love science like this. Way over my head, don't get me wrong. I don't know anything, but it's interesting. We just don't hear a lot of these stories. These aren't the ones that sort of rise to the top, right? Because everyone's focused on whatever stories, and myself included, to be honest with you. So I look forward to actually digging more into this and having more conversations like this. I've got an interview coming up. I don't want to give too many details until it actually happens, but I will be exploring these type of ideas, right, with someone who is clearly qualified to talk about it. Now, please leave your comments down below. This is just, again, absolutely insane, right? First of all, how come I've never heard of these materials that just dissipate to dust and are clearly, they're so convinced these materials are extraterrestrial, right? That's intriguing, right? And if they can talk about it in a podcast, why can't we see some evidence or pictures, or maybe we can somehow? I don't know. If there is a way, leave a comment down below, put a link. Let's find out, help me out here, betters. Right. I'll look myself, but I couldn't find anything like this related to this. So I don't know. If y'all have any ideas, let me know. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Again, I'll put links in the description. Go check it out. I highly recommend listening to this entire podcast. It is just chock full of different people kind of giving their testimonies that work in this field. And I loved it. I loved it. So anyway, all right, guys, we'll see you guys on tomorrow's video. Remember, every day's a gift, y'all. Peace.
I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in the cradles, profanities. I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross out the ones who heard my cries and watched me weep.